Men do not make laws, they do but discover them. Laws must be justified by something more than the will of the majority. They must rest on the eternal foundation of righteousness. Calvin Coolidge, 30th President of the United States. All right, welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time. Well, this afternoon, not so early. So I woke up this morning and there was an internet outage. So there was no way to stream. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just do it. I'll do it during lunch. That's fine. And then getting right up close to lunch, I'm setting some things up and I start having some issues with Rumble. I think I got past them at least for the time being, although I need to go back and look. It was not letting me set up a scheduled, it wasn't letting me schedule a future podcast or a stream. And instead, I had to go immediately to like stream right now. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. I don't know what's going on with that. So it just was giving me an error. And then seems like X is down. So I don't even know if we're streaming to X right now because X is down at the moment. At least from what I can tell, it seems like some people on mobile may have access to it, whereas people that are using their web browser currently do not. So it's giving me an error. I have no idea. I guess I could look at my phone and see if my phone shows anything. It's kind of weird because I'm looking at the screen here. It's not loading my tweets, but at the same time, it seems to say that I'm hosting. So I think I'm streaming there, but I'm not really sure. So we will just keep going on. My VA lady said she's going to check and see. But, hey, the show must go on. We got to do what we can. Let me see. I'm just going to take a quick look here and see if I can access it from my mobile device. And let's see. It doesn't appear to be accessing from my mobile. So I don't know. It seems like streaming to Twitter or X is iffy right now. So if you're watching this on social media, if you're not on YouTube or if you're not on Rumble or Facebook, which it should be going to Facebook, it is going to Facebook. So if you're on Twitter, hey, thanks. But I won't be able to see any comments whatsoever for sure. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? Man, I tell you what, legislators keep me busy. I actually was thinking that this week I may just do a bunch of bill reviews. Like I've got like several that I was looking at and I was like, I could do this one. I could do that one. Today we're going to do two because they're both from Texas and they both are surrounding trans issues. So I figured, hey, why not? So let's take a look and see what our esteemed media has to say about this.
Texas lawmakers have filed a number of bills that could impact transgender Texans this legislative session, including a bill filed this week that would create a new crime, gender identity fraud. House Bill 3817 is the work of Republican Representative Dr. Tom Oliverson from Cyprus. Under the bill, if a transgender person makes a verbal or written statement saying they are the sex they identify with rather than their biological sex to a government agency or their employer, they could be committing gender identity fraud. HB 3817 makes this a state jail felony punishable by up to 2 years in jail.
Bill in the Texas House that aims to restrict which bathrooms transgender people can use is getting lots of support from lawmakers. House Bill 239 is co-authored by a majority of the chamber. It would require family violence shelters, prisons, bathrooms, and locker rooms in state and county buildings to be used depending on a person's biological sex. Anyone who violates the law would be fined $5,000 for the first offense. A second offense would increase the fine to $25,000. The bill does make exceptions for single person and family restrooms, as well as for children under 10 and people who need help using those facilities. That will have been referred to the House State Affairs Committee.
All right. So that's those are your whoops, clicked on the wrong buttons here. Those are your two bills. So we've got HB 239, HB 3817. One says, hey, we're going to create this, we're going to set it up so that there is a thing called gender identity fraud. And then the other one says, we're dealing with the bathrooms. So let's take a look at 239. That is the one that deals with the bathrooms. So we'll put that up on the screen. We'll just dive right on into this and see what we can find. So let me see. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Let me go to, give me a second. I got to clicked on the wrong thing here. Where is the, oh yeah, right there. How about that? And is it not, you're not cooperating? Okay, so that's not the one I wanted. You know what? I see what I did wrong. Okay, there we go. All right. How about that? There we go. So we have this up on the screen now. Let me see, make sure. Hold on, let me make sure I got the right one here. Give me a second, folks. Yes, 239. Yes, yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, so there we are. We got it up on the screen. Apologies for that. All right, so this one is, well, it's 10 pages. So right off the bat, it's not good. I don't like it. I don't like bills that are extensive. 1 or 2 pages in most cases. Now, if they're revising code, they're revising the law, and they need to have like 10 or 20 pages because there's that much law that they're modifying, then it might make sense. So let's take a look at this one. We're going right here. So it says definitions. Everybody that does the bill review with me knows definitions are important. How are we defining certain things? So biological sex, here's what it says. Biological sex means the physical condition of being male or female as determined by their sex, by the sex organs, chromosomes, and endogenous profiles of a person. Basically like the chemical makeup, stuff like that. Then B, and I've got it highlighted in orange, a person's original birth certificate if the biological sex is correctly stated on the birth certificate as indicated by the biological sex being 1, entered at or near the time of birth, or modified only to correct a scrivener or clerical error in the biological sex. So if somebody if it says male and it previously said MLE because somebody made a mistake, they made a typo, then that would count. Or if the birth certificate was like, hey, this is a person who is a male, and it was at the time of birth, that's when this information was put there. So that would make the birth certificate correct. Here's the thing. I don't really take an issue here with the biological sex definition. It seems fine. Is it complete? No, people argue about these things all the time. Now, typically, biological sex is defined by you can think of it 5 things. Chromosomes. The presence of sex chromosomes is a primary indicator. XX, female biological sex. XY, male. There are variations, XXY, X0, but these are the exceptions, right? And we think of them as anomalies. Like, hey, that's not how nature was supposed to work. It just happened to do that, right? Like, because nature didn't fully configure this body correctly. Correctly meaning based on what we understand. And I think this is where a lot of people object because they're like, oh, you think it's just X, Y, and XX. Well, have you heard about this? And it's like, yes, those are anomalies. Those are exceptions. Those are not the rule. And they stem from this foundation of XXXY. That's why you have them. That's how we know that there's some sort of variation or that they're rare, right? Like people seem to want to act as if it's like XX, XY, and AB, like something entirely different. No, the XXY, XO, and whatever else there might be out there, those all stem from the original two. That's where they like you can look and say, hey, this one, here's what happened. Here's why it's XXY instead of XX or XY. You can say that, right? You can have that conversation. So chromosomes are basically broke down into two, and then anything else is an anomaly. Then you have the second one. There's five. Remember, there's number two, gonads. So you've got ovaries, which female sex, testes, male sex. Pretty simple. Then you have hormone levels and function. So your higher testosterone levels are correlated with male development, whereas higher estrogen levels, female development. Hormone levels alone are not definitive. So they kind of rely on other things. So you have to, because they can fluctuate. You can have you can have a male with a lot of testosterone. You can have a male with limited amount of testosterone. You can have like some area in between, right? So you can't just look and be like, how much exactly, how much of this hormone level that will define whether you're male or female. No, because it varies anyway. So that was number three. Number four, internal reproductive structures, fallopian tubes, uterus, and vagina. Those would all be female sex, right? Structures for the female sex. While the prostate, vas deferens, and seminal vesicles are for the male sex, right? Very clear, very distinct. Then you have the external genitalia. So you at birth, you would have penis and scrotum for males, clitoris and labia for females. So 5 criteria, which generally go into determining biological sex. And when we look at all 5 of these, we can accurately identify and say, this is somebody who's of the male sex, this is somebody who's the female sex. And then we can also say, well, here's somebody who is outside of these two, and they're an anomaly. Now, that doesn't necessarily make them good or bad. We're not pronouncing moral judgments here. We're just simply saying, like, what has nature aimed? Okay, so let's put it in two contexts. If you're a religious person, you might say, how did God design the human body? Well, he designed it to have male and female. And then we can look at this criteria and we can say, yep, you're one of the two. You can look at, if you don't believe in religion, if you're not a religious person, you might say, well, evolution has brought us to the point where you have male and female. Here are some criteria. Then you can also say, guess what? There are some anomalies. In the same way that if somebody was born without 2 arms, and there are people who have been born without 2 arms, we recognize they are still human. And they were supposed to have 2 arms, but they didn't get them for whatever reason. And so we recognize they're an anomaly. We recognize that they're still part of they're still part of the human race. They're human. They're not like a half snake, right? Because they've only got legs and no arms. They are simply humans that were born, and I hate to use this term because it really angers people, but for lack of better phrasing, they're born defective. And I don't mean that again in a moral sense. I just mean like, what was evolution, or if you believe in creationism, what were they supposed to produce? Right? What was the expected outcome? Right? Like nobody's having a child and saying, "Man, I hope my child is born without arms." Right? Because we recognize that the entirety of existence here is defined around having 2 arms. However, we also recognize that if you're born without 2 arms, you are still part of our species. You still get to be considered human. So the same logic applies to male and female. Okay, so I'm okay with this definition, right? Because it's like sex organs, chromosomes, and endogenous profiles of a person. And so it pretty much mirrors what I just read to you. So I'm good with that. Where I'm not so impressed here is a person's original birth certificate if the biological sex is correctly stated on the birth. So like just the way that it's written kind of says like, hey, you can have this document as long as it says what it's supposed to say. And I'm like, for me, I would just say remove this part. You don't really need the certificate. You can make a reference to the certificate and say the certificate has to, list male or female based on the definition of biological sex, right? And then you don't. But I don't like this idea of saying like if this thing is correctly stated on there, because I feel like I like it to be less ambiguous than this. So I'm not a big fan of this B here. All right, so let's continue on. Let's see here. Um, just remember, exceptions are just that, exceptions. The birth certificate, it's using quantifiable characteristics, or because the bill is using quantifiable characteristics, it does seem to render that part unnecessary. But it's there and whatever. All right, let's see here. We'll go to I got my bookmarks here. All right. So we're going to go down here. And I'm not going to do the whole thing because it's like 10 pages and like nobody, even though I know it's not like 7:30 in the morning, does anybody really want to really walk through line by line on a 10-page document? No, probably not. So now we jump over to page 2 here, and we're looking at lines 9 through 15. So I'm going to read this. So this is still within the definition. So they're defining what it means when they say private space. Private space means a facility designed or designated for use by more than one person at a time, where a person may be in a state of undress in the presence of another person, regardless of whether the facility provides curtains or partial walls for privacy. The term includes a restroom, locker room, changing room, shower room, family violence shelter, correctional facility, and sleeping quarter. So they're basically saying if an individual is going to be in a room where they're undressed on some level, where other people might be in there, then this is considered a private space, right? And then they add family violence shelter and correctional facility and sleeping quarter, presumably so that to capture more than just like a small space, because you go from like restroom to the whole shelter. Okay, because like a shelter, like if it's a battered women's shelter, then you're going to have women there. And so what they're trying to ensure is that a battered women's shelter doesn't have a trans woman, which would be somebody who was born male and has determined that they are a trans person, they're a woman, and then maybe they're going through some level of all of the changes, or maybe not, right? But then they might say, "Hey, I've been abused. My spouse or my significant other was abusing me. I would like to stay in this family violence shelter." So therefore, the law now is saying, nope, you can't. You cannot do so. Okay. I guess I'm okay with this. Again, this is at the state level. So I tend to be a little bit more flexible when it's at the state level. If this were at the federal level, I would object, hands down, automatically. Because that's not, to me, this would not be within the purview, the proper role of the federal government. And you can argue and say whether or not this is the proper role of the state government. I tend to lean toward, if it's a state facility, then they need to make these distinctions. And if it's a private entity, then they ought to be making these distinctions. So if it's a coffee shop can determine whether or not, the bathroom, like let's say they have a bathroom that's not a onesie, it's not a one person bathroom, maybe they've got 2 or 3 stalls in there, and they can determine and say, hey, is this for men? Is this for women? Is this for, anybody, whatever, battle royale to go to the bathroom, whatever. So that's where I tend to land. And then the free market can take it from there. Now, when it comes to the government, I think that so long as you're under their care in any way, they are obligated to ensure your safety. Right? So if I'm in a prison, because they're putting me there against my will, so they're obligated to ensure my safety. And they need to figure out how that's best done. And we can say, and we can argue and say, well, trans people should get to use the bathroom of their choosing. But then you have to ask yourself, does doing that increase the amount of effort that a state is going to have to put into ensuring your safety. So let's say you're a trans man, and so you're a woman. You were born a woman, but you identify as a man. And you say, well, I want to use the men's restroom. And you're in prison. So then now is your safety at risk? What do they need to do to ensure that, since you may have female body parts and a criminal, because you're locked up with other criminals, they may not care too much about, protect trans rights and all that stuff. Because, they're already there for presumably violating somebody else's rights. So when it comes to private spaces, you got situations like that, and we can go through all kind of variations. But the idea being, what's the level of effort necessary that they have to put into ensuring your safety? And I think that a government ought to do the least amount possible to ensure your safety, especially when we're talking about prisoners, stuff like that, because you are literally being locked up against your will. Okay, so let's continue on. So that's the definitions. I'm not going to go through all of the definitions because I don't think they're very, I don't think it's necessarily relevant. So we're going to skip down here to page 3. This is lines 2 to 5. This is actually the meat of the bill. So, like, if you were to summarize this whole bill, it's right here. A political subdivision or a state agency shall require each private space located within a facility owned, operated, or controlled by the political subdivision or state agency be designated for and used only by persons based on the person's biological sex. So if you're owned, operated, or controlled by the government, right, or some agency, but basically the government, then you have to ensure that all the private spaces are only used by people based on their biological sex. So if you say this is a women's restroom, then that means biological women only, right? Biological females only in the women's restroom. Same thing for the male restroom, right? Biological males only, in the men's restroom. So this is basically the meat of it. After that, it gets into some nuances. So it'll say, like, okay, well, if you've got to deal with the Americans with Disabilities Act, if that's applicable, then, you have, you're not prohibited from doing that. It goes on to talk about, let's see, you can still establish single occupancy private spaces. So you can say, look, we don't want to do a whole bathroom with 2 or 3 stalls. We're just going to do like 3 or 4 small single ones. And then there, it doesn't matter because only one person can go in at a time. Personally, I think that's the better route. But whatever. You can also redesignate a space if you want. So you can say, like, all right, this used to be male only, but now we're making it female only, or whatever, what have you. So you can make some designations, but they still have to follow within the rules. All right. So that's what you got going here. So we're at page 3. And we basically got through the meat of the bill. Isn't that crazy? It's like a 10-page bill. Isn't that wild? Yeah, we're going to get to that in a second. So then we get over here to page 4. Okay, lines 13 to 19. So these are the penalties for not adhering to the law. Because you always got to have penalties, right? Because if you have a law, then, like, what's the consequence if you don't follow the law? You got to have something. It makes sense. Otherwise, you're basically the parent that's like, Johnny, that's 1. Johnny, that's 2. Don't make me get to 3, Johnny. Johnny, 2.5. Johnny, 2 3/4. Johnny, 2 7/8. You know what, Johnny? That's 1 again, right? Like that ends up what happens if you don't have penalties. But not only that, if you don't actually impose the penalties either. So presumably they will impose upon, because if they just have them, but then they never impose them, then it's the same thing as telling Johnny, 14 times that you were going to count to 3. So the penalties are, for the first violation, $5,000 fine. $5,000. And then after that, the second one, or any thereafter that, it jumps up to $25,000. And that's per day. So if on Monday, somebody's determined that they're violating this law, they're allowing trans women or trans men to go into the women's bathroom, because that tends to be the big issue, right? No, I'm sorry. Trans women. Yeah. Did I say it right? I think I said it right. But anyway, the big issue is allowing trans women into the women's bathroom. I think I did say it wrong. But that's really the big issue. No, not too many people are arguing and saying, "Hey, trans men shouldn't be in the locker room or the bathroom." That's not generally the argument that we're having, right? And I think this is where the argument tends to break down, because you've got one side that's trying to act as if men and women, I mean, naturally they have to act as if they're no different. They're the same, right? So therefore we can treat them the same. And so if you identify as a woman or if you identify as a man, you should be able to go into both bathrooms. But then the rest of society, we look at it and say, well, there is a distinction here. And it's more of a problem if men go into the women's restroom than it is if women go into the men's restroom, right? That tends to be the argument. Well, maybe not the argument as articulated, but that is the argument that people are making. They're like, hey, it's more concerning one than the other. But then you so 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 you got this $5,000 fine and $25,000 fine after that. Wow, that's a lot. All right. Then after that, lines 20 to 23. This is your complaint notice. So a citizen of this state may file. So that's interesting. A citizen of this state may file a complaint with the attorney general that a political subdivision or state agency is in violation of this chapter, only if, and then it gives the criteria. So presumably, if I go to Texas and I see something, I can't say something. Can't be like, hey, there's a violation here. Right. So this is only, I presumably, because it says citizen of this state, right? Texas. I'm a citizen of Florida, right? Interesting. I mean, I don't oppose that. Like, I think that states can make their own rules and say these rules are applicable to people that are citizens of this particular state. And then they can have either no rules or other rules that deal with people that are not citizens of their state. So I'm okay with that. And I'm not really okay with the violations here, because $5,000 and then $25,000. Like, so on Monday, somebody makes a complaint and then they don't resolve it until Wednesday. So they're going to have $55,000 in fines potentially, right? Like, that's for 3 days. And, like, the real question there is who has actually been harmed? Like, because this doesn't limit to violations that lead to any kind of harm. This just says if I go to, a women's shelter and they're allowing men, who are trans women to come in, if and like, I'm like, they could be punished for that, even if nothing has actually happened. So I'm not a big fan of this, and I don't like that big huge jump from 5 to 25. That's a huge jump. I'd be curious to know how they come up with these numbers. So anyway, moving right along here. So we're going to skip down to page 7. All right. So let's go down to page 7 here. And this is where I think it gets a little bit interesting. So let me read this. Immunity from suit and limits on jurisdiction. Notwithstanding any other law, the state and each of its officers and employees shall have sovereign immunity. Its political subdivisions and each of their officers and employees shall have governmental immunity, and each officer and employee of the state and its political subdivisions shall have official immunity in any action, claim, counterclaim, or any type of legal or equitable action that challenges the validity of any provision or application of this chapter on constitutional grounds or otherwise, or that seeks to prevent or enjoin the state or its political subdivisions or any officer, employee, or agent of this state or political subdivision from enforcing any provision. Okay. It's a very, very long, I think it's that one long sentence. The legal profession loves 50, 60, 100 word sentences. Side point, that's unrelated to this issue. This is a long section here to basically say, we're all immune from any lawsuits over this. You can't sue us. My position on this, you should never like they should never be immune from a lawsuit, from a legal challenge. Because you should be doing things legally in the first place. So if you're doing your job, now you could say, like, I would argue that it might be acceptable to say employees, government employees are immune so long as they're following the letter of the law, right? Because the idea is that it's their job, they're paid to do what they're told to do. Therefore, they should do what they're told to do. And if they say, hey, I think this law is immoral, that should be its own issue. But if they think, you know what, I believe this law is moral, and they might say, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to follow this law and I'm going to make sure that only men go into this bathroom and only women go into this bathroom. I don't think that they should necessarily be punished for doing their job as it's spelled out in the law. This is different. This is different, folks, from saying I was just doing my job. Okay. So we're not talking about like insulating people from doing their job when they're doing things that are morally reprehensible. What we're saying is because that argument was used all over the place. Oh, I was just doing my job. I was just doing my job. That's why I had to kill these people. That's why I had to do this. Why I had to do this terrible thing. Right. And I think in this particular case, the law is spelling out who can use a bathroom. So the law isn't, hey, go and gas these people. And then somebody coming by and going, I was just doing my job. Why are you mad at me? Wait, why should I be guilty of rounding people up? You know what I'm saying? So I think there's a distinct difference here. And we need to be very careful with it. Because at the end of the day, when you're an employee, your job is to do what you're told, whether you're an employee of a private entity or you're the employee in the public sector. You should do your job. And if it's spelled out in law, right, then I think there are situations where some immunity would be appropriate. And those are things where we're specifically not, like, trying to think of how to phrase this. Things that are generally not obvious to the typical person as a violation of rights, because it's arguable right now. Would you be violating somebody's right to use the bathroom of their choice? I don't think so, right? Especially if my position is in the private sector, they should be able to determine how they operate the bathrooms. So company A over here could say everybody has to use the same 2 bathrooms that are single use only, or are single person only. So it doesn't matter. And then company B might say, well, we have 2 major bathrooms. Each one has, several stalls in it. One is for women, one is for men. And you need to be a male to go into the men's restroom. You need to be a female to go into the women's restroom. And then they can determine, what does that look like, right? Like what do they mean when they say male and female? And then you might have a third business who says, look, we have a single use bathroom for anybody that wants it. We also have 2 major bathrooms. If you identify as male, if you identify as female, then you go into those respective bathrooms, right? And the free market will take care of that. So by saying that, that's me ultimately saying there is no violation in saying, if you come here, the bathroom that you're permitted to use is this one, right? I don't see that as a violation. So the fact that, it would be in law one way or another, I think this would be an opportunity where employees, if the law got challenged, they wouldn't be held liable. Just so you see the distinction that I'm trying to make here, and hopefully I'm not arguing, but articulating it well to make it, stand out clearly from people that were covering their ass and saying, I was just doing my job. Sorry, I didn't know that we were gassing millions of people, right? Which is where that comes from. So I want to make sure that we make this distinction. Okay, so let's continue back in that. So that's what that big section says right there. And then if we go down to this next section here, which is, let's see, I think it's on page 9 here. So this is interesting. Award of attorneys' fees and actions challenging certain privacy laws. So notwithstanding any other law, any person, including an entity, attorney, or law firm who seeks declaratory or injunctive relief to prevent this state, a political subdivision, any governmental entity or public official in this state or any person in this state from enforcing any statute, ordinance, rule, regulation, or any other type of law that regulates access to a private space based on biological sex in any state or federal court, or that represents any litigant seeking such relief in any state or federal court. I'm trying, folks. This is a long, long single sentence. You know what? I'm just going to fail the whole bill. I'm failing the whole bill. The whole bill's garbage. I'm going to tell you why. Number one, it doesn't outline and specifically state, hey, in the free market, you guys handle it, and in the public sector where we're in control, we're handling it, and you do what you do, we're going to do what we do. Here are the criteria that we're going to do it under, and then so it's not, it doesn't specifically state that that the private entity, the private sector can do whatever they wish, and that they will deal with it on the free market. It doesn't have that criteria in there, so that's already out because they're not distinguishing between the two. Then you've got some questionable things in here, right? Like this whole birth certificate thing. Like, is it actually correct or not? No, just give your criteria and say, here's the criteria for what the government is going to consider to be your sex. And when it comes to the bathroom, the criteria for you using this particular bathroom as designated for men or women is this. And then for entities that are under our control, so such as maybe a battered woman's shelter, presumably, and presumably in this particular case, they have other laws that specify certain control, or they're just identifying, this one exception to the private sector. But to me, this bill is unclear in certain areas. It doesn't clearly define the difference between the private and the public sector. And then I'm not a big fan of insulating itself in the way that it does. I'm also not a big fan of saying, look, with that last section that I was reading, that went into basically saying, if you sue us and you lose, you pay all of our fees. I oppose that. You should always be able to sue the government. Now, if the government wants to come back and countersue and say, which I don't even know if it's a thing because I'm not a lawyer, but let's say they want to countersue and they want to say, hey, you just sued us, you lost, and all this money we had to pay just to prove that, we weren't doing the wrong thing. And then their countersuit can be, you need to pay these bills because these bills are ultimately paid by the American taxpayers. I would accept something like that. That's fine. I have no issue with the state coming back and saying, hey, okay, you came at us and it was in good faith, but you lost. Okay, taxpayers are on the hook. That would be acceptable. And it would be acceptable to say, okay, hey, you came at us and we think it was not in good faith. So now that you've lost, we're going to take you back to court and we're going to sue you for all the money that the taxpayers had to pay for, because we believe that you came at us, and costed us money for no good reason. That would be acceptable. But it should not be acceptable to completely take it off the table. And because it ultimately ends up being a threat and saying, don't sue us. I dare you. Because we'll win. Because it carves out all these protections for itself. The government should not be carving out protections for itself. Okay. So that's that bill. That is Bill 239. So now let's get to HB 3817, which is going to go way, way faster. And you'll see what I mean here. So let's get to this one. All right. This one is literally a single page. That's it. Like, I like that. I like it. It's a single page. Here's what it says. A person commits an offense if the person knowingly makes a false or misleading verbal or written statement to a governmental entity or the person's employer by identifying the person's biological sex as the opposite of the biological sex assigned to the person at birth. An offense under this section is a state jail felony. So where do I stand on this? I'm going to fail this bill too. Why? Here's the thing. I understand fraud. And I think most people understand fraud. If you were to define it, it would go something like any activity that relies on deception in order to achieve a gain. Fraud becomes a crime effectively when it is knowing misrepresentation of the truth or concealment of a material fact to induce another to act to his or her detriment. Okay. So if I am, let's say I'm transgender and I decide that I'm a woman and I go to my employer and I mark down that I'm a woman, okay, that shouldn't be fraud because I'm not trying to deceive them necessarily at their expense. I legitimately believe this. And this is what I want other people to believe. That's how this whole issue works. People identify in a way, and then they're working overtime to get other people to recognize that identity. Now, I don't believe you have an obligation to recognize somebody's identity. But if somebody believes that their identity is a thing and they're doing everything they can to convince you, then that's to me not the same as how we understand fraud. Fraud is deceiving somebody into doing something they wouldn't otherwise do. Well, if I'm marking male or female on there, and I honestly believe that I'm male or female, and I can show you evidence, like if you question it, if you go, DL, you're looking kind of like a man. You got a beard, you still got broad shoulders, your Adam's apples, they're all good to go there. Your voice is deep, right? You're wearing what's understood as men's clothing. It's where exactly are you a woman here? And if somebody questions me, it shouldn't be wrong to question it. And then I can give my answer. And then I can say, well, I just recognized this yesterday and I'm starting here. And in the future, I'll be doing this, this, and this, and this, and this, right? That's not fraud. That's not deception. Now, if I got convicted of a crime and then somewhere in that, like I got, like, let's say I get arrested for a crime and I know I'm going to go to jail. And then all of a sudden I go, yeah, I'm totally a female because I'm trying to, make my prison sentence presumably a little easier. Like I'll just go into jail with a bunch of women. By the way, if you watch Orange is the New Black, you'll probably understand why that's not really the best of choices. But anyway, so if that's that person, if they're just trying to make it make their life easier, then yeah, I would call that fraud. But this bill, it doesn't. It just says like, look, it's fraud if we've determined, if the government has decided that you're male or female and you say otherwise, and you try to live that life, that's fraud. I disagree. I think it needs to be more. I think it needs to be worked out a little bit more. I think there are situations where it would count. And I think there are other situations where they could say, this isn't fraud, but you're also not getting your way. Like that would be acceptable as well, right? At the state level for them to say, we don't recognize it. You can mark it all you want. We don't recognize it. Okay. But that's not necessarily fraud. I mean, if you think about it, I go to my company and I go to I go to people, I go to the government. What's your name? DL. That's not technically my name. It's not on any legal documents, right? So therefore, that would also be fraud under this same logic. And a lot of people do it. A lot of people go by maybe their middle name, or some, something or a nickname or something like that, right? But a lot of people do not use explicitly their legal name, and they may mark that down on a document. I don't see that as fraud if that's how they're actively trying to live. I am actively trying to live as DL. Is that my actual name? No, it's an abbreviation. It's the initials to my first and my middle name. So in a sense it is, but it's a variation that I have concocted. But I'm also living by it. If you call me up on the phone, you're like, "Hey DL." Or if you tag me on social media, "Hey DL," I respond. If you call me, if I'm walking down the street and I hear, "Hey DL," yes, what's up? Because I'm living by DL. And if other people are trying to live as a female, as a male, then I would say they are not committing fraud. They are committing fraud if and only if they're using that to deceive somebody else for their benefit. That is and think about that. Deceive somebody else. Like if you believe that you're really a woman, you're not trying to deceive people. You're trying to convince them. So I don't like this bill. I think both bills I'm rejecting because they need to do better. And here's the thing. I actually don't have an issue with saying males should use the men's restroom and females should use the women's restroom. I'm comfortable with that. I think that's worked for a long time, a very, very long time. And I think the benefits to it outweigh any potential negatives. I also believe that in the free market, if they want to accommodate, however they do, the scenarios that I gave you earlier, that is fully acceptable, and there should be no argument. So that's where I stand. Let's get to some comments here real quick, and then we're gonna come back. We're gonna get some comments, intermission, and then we're gonna come back, and then we're going to kind of put this in the context of the Libertarian Party platform, because how do these bills operate, or how do they exist in the context? What's the perspective from the platforms? So let's look at some comments here. Let's see here. Yeah, X is buffering. I've been seeing that. Let me see if is it fixed yet. It seems like it's not yet fixed. I've got it up over here. So yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. It's not working. So let's see. Libertarian JRT. Bathroom bills are ridiculous. As a rule of thumb, I think so. I don't think I've supported a single one. Now, your definition of ridiculous and mine may be different. I think that I think that there isn't a case for them, but Republicans who are the ones that are passing them. They're not going to like my version. And neither will Democrats either, because the Republicans won't like it because I'll say the free market can do whatever they want and the state can make their, they can focus and make certain narrow judgments. And then the Democrats, for the same reason, because the free market can do what it wants, which would mean that the free market could say, there's no such thing as transgender bathrooms here. You either use male or female, and you use them based on your biological sex. So that would piss off the Democrats, whereas the Republicans are going to get upset because the opposite could happen. Somebody could say, well, in this bathroom, in this store, you can use whatever bathroom you identify with. All right. So I'm going to make them both mad. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see. The law already protects people from violence. I agree. And I'm not particularly motivated by this idea that we need to pass these laws or else women will start being harmed. That's not really an appeal, because like a man could have dressed up as a woman anytime in my lifetime. This is not a new possibility. Could have always happened. So that's not really a motivator for me. And I would probably pick apart most any bill that's a bathroom bill. But I do see a situation where, hey, maybe if they wrote a bill properly, I would support it. I guess that's where I am. Let's see here. Let's see. I thought it was your username. I guess you're talking about my VA lady says I thought that was your username. If you're talking about DL, no, it's actually my first name and my middle name, Daniel and Leroy. And I just want to point out really quickly, just in case anybody's like curious, if you go look up what Daniel means, it means judge. If you look up Leroy, it actually comes from the French word Leroy, which is the king. So if you're wondering, if you've ever been like, why is DL podcasting? Because I have to pass judgment as the king. I'm sorry, that was so corny and stupid. Let's go to intermission. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, we're back. I'm done with my, honestly, that wasn't really a joke, the whole Daniel Leroy thing. That was actually serious, right? like I actually, that's what my name means. But that's not really why I chose to use it. So just in case. Okay, so let's take a look at the platform here. Let's just see how all this squares away with the Libertarian Party. And we're going to do Libertarian Party and Libertarian Party of Texas. We're going to look at both of them. So here's the Libertarian Party platform. Let's blow it up on the screen a little bit so that you can see it. Okay, that looks much, much more better. All right, so we're going to go down. I've got it highlighted down here. So personal relationships. And so in my opinion, nothing in either one of the platforms explicitly is related to bathrooms, nor should they be. Right? In my opinion, the National Party, their platform should be primarily national matters or maybe matters that are of great public importance that everybody's always talking about. So, but otherwise, I think they should have a similar separation to our government. And then the state level affiliates, they can have ones where they can say, all right, the libertarians in this state have come to an agreement that these are the things that we're pushing for within our state. And so you could, in theory, have two different states that have slightly different platforms. So it says sexual orientation, preference, gender, or gender identity should have no impact on the government's treatment of individuals, such as in current marriage, child custody, adoption, immigration, or military service laws. So I don't know that this is a strong correlation, right? Because you're not punishing people and you're not prioritizing any particular person. You're just simply saying, like, from the government's perspective, you're just saying, like, we have a set of criteria that we could identify as male. We have a set of criteria that we can identify as female. So therefore, when it comes to the bathroom, we're going to separate them. I guess you could argue and say, yeah, this one kind of sort of hints because it should have no impact on the treatment of individuals. But I don't think that they're just simply saying, like, who is allowed to go into this bathroom? Not who's allowed to go to the bathroom at all, who's allowed to go into this particular bathroom, right? So if it's a family bathroom, they could say, hey, if you don't have a special edge case, or you're not a family member, you don't have your family with you, or maybe they could say, like, this is only for families, like whatever. So I don't know. This one I'm a little torn on. I can see it both ways. Then we go down, crime and justice. Laws should be limited in their application to violations of the rights of others through force or fraud, or to deliberate actions that place others involuntarily at significant risk of harm. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. Therefore, we favor the repeal of all laws creating crimes without victims. So that's another issue that this bathroom bill has. Is there an actual tangible victim? Now, this is where I get in trouble with a lot of people, especially people on the right. Because if I said, like, a man just walking into the bathroom is not immediately creating a victim. One might be created if the man has nefarious intentions. But at just walking in, just the act of walking in is not creating a victim. Even if they're trying to use the bathroom. That's not necessary. That might make women uncomfortable, but uncomfortable and being a victim of a crime are two different things. So I look at it and I say, while it was a little ambiguous up here on the personal relationships, I think we get a little clarity down here at 1.7 crime and justice, where it says the laws should be limited to applying, to application to violations of rights. Well, I don't think there's a violation of a right. Like, I don't think you have a right to use a particular bathroom. Just don't think you do. And if there is such a right, why don't you think about this? If you're a woman, a biological woman, and you say, well, I have a right to use a bathroom without biological men because I'm a biological woman, then a trans person could say, well, I'm a this, I should have the right based on this same criteria, right? Like I should be able to do this thing too. And so I think you start getting yourself into a bit of trouble, a bit of like, I think you confuse the issue when you say that this is a right. Because if the woman has a right, then the man, who is supposedly a woman, they have a right too. So how does that right operate? So, because the woman identifies as, the woman identifies as a woman, and all the reasons that she would be uncomfortable are related to being a woman. Whereas if this person over here identifies as a male, as a female, but they're biologically a male, all their concerns might also be based on their identity. So you see so I think we have to be very careful when we're crafting laws and say, is there an actual violation of somebody's rights here? And then furthermore, since I'm kicking it to the free market and saying the free market can do whatever they want, that would mean there's no significant right either way. Because if this company could say we're only having single bathrooms and you go in whichever one is available, and then this company over here says, hey, biologically based bathrooms, and this other company says however you identify bathrooms, then clearly there is no violation of a right if all three of them could do those things simultaneously. So I'm not really I'm not like, I would reject the bill more than likely, even if they cleaned it up, because I would say, is there a violation of the right? Now, I'm leaving it on the table because maybe they could write a bill. They might write a bill that says, hey, in prisons, in violence shelters, where people are coming in there and they're vulnerable, and there are people that are of questionable, like explicitly questionable in their morality, maybe we need to put some extra guards here in these particular cases. Like, that would make sense to me, right? And we already do that. We already have these kind of things. Like, if you go to an abuse center, and you go to a battered women's shelter, and you say like, hey, my husband's beating on me, they're not going to let the husband in, right? Like, that's an additional protection. But if I go to Target and I say my wife is assaulting me, there's gonna be like, they're gonna call the police necessarily, unless they see her assault me. But if my wife's in there just like trying to yell at me, they might try to get us both out, but they're not gonna explicitly say, DL can be here, you cannot. Right? Not necessarily. So for me, I look at it and I say, I don't know that this whole bathroom thing is a violation of anybody's rights. It is just a matter of, I guess you can boil it down to preference. How do we prefer these things operate? Now, before all the conservatives and the right wingers get mad at me and they're like, you just hate women, you don't want to protect them. Number one, I think the free market would actually lead to a place where you pretty much only have women bathrooms, men bathrooms, right? Like, there wouldn't be this bathrooms by chosen identity or preferred identity, or however they want to describe it, right? I don't think the free market would produce that anyway. So you can stop being mad at me, because I think it's going to produce what you want in the first place. The only reason we're not getting that is because the government supports things, right? The government puts in laws and says you can't discriminate. And then somebody's like, "Whoa, I was discriminated because they wouldn't let me in this bathroom." And then they take it to court, and then there's all this drama, blah, blah, blah. But if you just left it straight up on the free market, I think what people would find is that women would be comfortable, because they would be the only biological women would be allowed in the female bathroom or in the women's bathroom. So don't be getting mad at me, folks. I think This is why we're talking about this stuff, because I think that people need to realize that like a lot of people look and say, well, libertarians, you're just, you're this, you're that, you don't understand the world. No, I think actually our vision of the world is a lot more clear than people realize, and that it would actually produce a lot better results than we're getting now. I think that was it. I don't think I had anything else. Oh, no, I did. So this is under aggression, property, and contract, right? Under economic liberty. As respect for property rights is fundamental to maintaining a free and prosperous society, it follows that the freedom to contract, to obtain, retain, profit from, manage, or dispose of one's property must also be upheld. Libertarians would free property owners from government restrictions on their rights to control and enjoy their property, as long as their choices do not harm or infringe on the rights of others. So again, I've established that I don't believe going to the bathroom based on your chosen identity is necessarily a right. Okay. And I believe that we should kick it to the free market when it's a private entity. This portion right here supports that. So I think the Libertarian Party platform supports the idea that it goes to the private, that in the private sector, they have to manage it at their discretion. In the public sector, they manage it, and they do so on the basis of ensuring that they are protecting the rights of individuals. So again, if you got a prison, it might make more sense to have rules in the prison that are not rules that you have in the courthouse, right? Because in the courthouse, you've got a lot of people coming in. They're presumably trying to, prove that they're not guilty of something, what have you. Maybe they're just trying to, come in there and pay some taxes or whatever, right? Like, but you generally have people who are not criminals, convicted criminals in the courthouse, like not to the degree that you have, like, say, a prison. In prison, you have convicted criminals. And in an ideal world, they would only be violent criminals, which would mean it would especially be in a place where you would have stricter rules. So I think my perspective is supported. My objection to these bills is supported by the Libertarian Party platform. This is the national party. And that was it. Oh, okay. So marketplace freedom, libertarians support free markets. We do. All right. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no more. So we're good for there. So now let's take a look at the Texas platform. All right. So I don't think there's a whole lot here that I highlighted that I thought was relevant to the conversation. But under rights of the family, LP Texas seeks to abolish legislation and policies that define what a family is. So I think already they're going to have some issues with at least one of these bills, because you've got the family violence centers, which they have definitions of who, what is a family, so on and so forth. But that may be not enough. Maybe they might say, okay, well, we kind of support this bill and we just disagree with some elements that are added in there that could be easily removed. Okay. So we'll go on. Property rights. Property rights are subject to neither infringement nor interference by any individual or government entity. So my read here is they support the idea of the free market. Free market can do whatever it wants. So again, you could have single-use bathrooms. You could have bathrooms where people go into them based on their biological sex or based on their preferred identity. All right, let's see. Is that it? That is it. No, one more. Sorry, I should have taken notes. I apologize, folks. Federal authority to prosecute crime is limited to only a few subjects: treason, counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States, piracy and felonies committed on the high seas, offenses against the law of nations, and violations of rights by state agents. We find no authority in the U.S. Constitution for extraterritorial criminal jurisdiction, including drug trafficking. So this isn't really relevant per se to the state level, other than to say it should not be at the federal level, because they have defined what the federal government for crimes, for prosecuting crimes, should be. That's all this is saying. I just thought that was kind of an additional point. So as far as I'm concerned, the state party here, their platform is a little bit unclear. Like, if you're just going by the platform, I think it's not as clear whether or not these two bills should necessarily be supported. Now, you can make an argument on the property rights, but outside of that, which again the bills don't do, they don't determine, like they don't distinguish between private property and public, and saying, hey, private property can do whatever they want explicitly. They don't explicitly say that, right? So just because like today, it says, hey, this is for the government. But then since it doesn't explicitly, carve out exceptions for what the private sector can do, then that means later they could just update the law again and say, yeah, we're including the private sector as well. Right. And it would be an easier task because you've already got it implemented. So I would say it's kind of a 50-50 on whether or not the Texas, LP Texas, whether or not their platform would support these bills. I think it's pretty clear that the national platform does not support those bills. So that's where I am, folks. Apologies. I feel like this was kind of dragging a little bit. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, let me see what we got for comments here. So we'll get to some comments, a little comment music there. So we got one dad joke today. You did. Should I try to do more dad jokes on a daily basis? I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. Let's see. And then let's see. That was Time Surfing Alien, who also said, from my understanding, laws and the Constitution protect everyone regardless of race, color, creed, ethnicity, or gender identification. Seems like singling out certain groups for special treatment is. Yes. And I hopefully, and they said special treatment is discrimination. Number one, I don't necessarily have a problem with discrimination, but I have a broader definition of it. My version of discrimination says you are discriminating against a number of other things. It's like when I chose my wife, I discriminated against a bunch of other women. Like I didn't even give them, they weren't even in the running for it. Right. Like, and I don't have any specifics at the moment, but the point being, we always discriminate every day. We make choices and we do not give all of the options fair chances. That's discrimination. And so I think the discrimination for me, it's not an issue of is discrimination happening? It's is a right being violated. So in this particular case, I don't think a right is being violated by saying you have to use the bathroom based on, the views of this particular store or restaurant or what have you. But I do think that when it comes to the government, they have, they can look at it and they can say, okay, there are certain situations for which violence is more prone. Jail, right? Like we got criminals in jail. Some of them violent criminals. They commit crimes even in jail, violent crimes. So therefore, since we're forcing people to be in there, we need to do the best that we can to protect everybody. And since I don't believe that using a particular bathroom is a right, then the prisons could say males use the men's room, females use the women's room, right? And then if it's just the state house, I think it's a toss-up, right? Like if it's the courthouse, I think it's a toss-up. Personally, I think the easy answer is simply make them single bathrooms. Everybody can just wait outside. Call it a day. Go to the bathroom before you come in, right? And that cuts down on cleaning and maintenance, and all that good stuff. So that's where I stand. Anyway, folks, hope you enjoyed this episode. I feel like it was a little bit off today. I think it's because I got up and just everything was out of whack, and it's just kind of, making it, like Twitter's still not back up, but although it looks like I may be streaming to Twitter, I'm not really sure if I'm even streaming to Twitter. I was having the issue with Rumble Studio earlier. Before that, I was having a problem with the internet. So I don't know. I feel like today's episode was a little bit off. I apologize, but we'll be back tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be kicking hard and doing some cool things. So anyway, talk to you guys tomorrow. And for now, we will head on out. There it is. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.com/Rants. rumble.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.